Every great travel journey begins with a question. Where to next? And how do we protect what makes it beautiful? Welcome to the Conscious Check-In, the podcast where sustainable hospitality, unforgettable travel, and bold conservation stories collide. I'm your host, Amy Wald, and this is your Conscious Check-In. Well, welcome back to the Conscious Check-In, everyone. It's my morning, but it is our guest today, Jason Gelineau. It is his evening. Hi, Jason. How are you?
Hi, Amy. It's great. Good morning to you and good evening from Perth, Western Australia.
So amazing. And thank you for taking the time before your big trip to Antarctica. And we'll be excited to hear a little bit about that. I want to let the audience know a little bit about you. Jason, you have a really rich background in hospitality, both on land and on sea. Industry insiders, they may not even know a few facts about you. You have Caribbean roots, right?
Yes, I went to high school in Jamaica when I was a teenager in Kingston, Jamaica.
And you kind of got a love boat start. You started on the Golden Princess in 1984. And you've even called yourself Gopher. And I love that.
94.
Yes. Oh my God, I need.
Well, that's all right. Because if you'd said 84, I'd probably be closer to the Titanic. But no, I did. I went to sea in 94, and my first ship was the Golden Princess. And I grew up watching the Love Boat. And it was a dream of mine. And when I'd spent so much time in the Caribbean, seeing ships sail in and out of harbor, and when I got into hospitality, and I'm not a fan of the cold, I'm originally from Canada, and I wanted to travel, and I didn't want to pay to travel. I wanted to get paid to travel. I thought, okay, how do I put all this together? And there was an ad in the. I was living in Whistler, British Columbia at the time, and there was an ad in the local. It was called The Province, the Saturday paper. I was visiting my sister in Victoria on the weekend, and I saw this ad for the Love Boat, Princess Cruises, a junior assistant purser. And I said, well, you know what? I'm Gopher with Isaac's personality. So I thought this is going to be perfect for me. And I'd been in hospitality, already for 7 years. And my plan was to go to sea for 2 years. And that was 2 years ago. And here we're talking about it still.
That's a great story. Honestly, I get goosebumps. I grew up watching the Love Boat as well. But I never thought I would find myself on ships, and I did work on Princess. So we have that in common. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I owe a lot to my time at sea, and it's a cherished time for me. So, but it's Australia week. So we're going to bring the Australian vibes here, and I'd love to dig in. So you gave us a little bit about your journey, but I'd love to hear, what was that contrast for you really from working on land in hospitality first to then working at sea?
Two things that come to mind immediately was obviously the diversity of nationalities and the demographics. And back then, I thought it was a lot. We had 17 different nationalities on a ship. Now you're looking at 70 to 80 different nationalities on a ship. So that was really, really interesting and really exciting. And I was very fortunate. The school I had gone to in Kingston, Jamaica, was an international school with a lot of diplomats, children, and stuff like that. So I had been exposed to different demographics. And of course, growing up in the 70s in Canada, we were a very diverse country. So, but to work side by side. The other thing was working 7 days a week with no days off. And my first contract was 8.5 months. But I was 22 years old and I was traveling and seeing the world. And, my meals were being made, my bed was being made. I'm thinking, well, this is great. But yeah, I think it was the diversification of the crew members. And the negative side of it probably was the hierarchy. I didn't come from a military or background. And in Canada, we're very, egalitarian. We're very kind of, sane type thing. And so that was a bit shocking, even for me, not being able to call certain officers by name. And there was a lot of fear management back in that day. And so that really was a bit of a culture shock from a negative side. There was many positives, but that part at that time really opened my eyes. And, it did send sorry, plant the seed for my future leadership, but it was something that I had not experienced before working in hospitality in Canada.
That's an interesting point because I think although it was a little bit of it was shocking, and it was for me as well, but it gave you a different perspective and an ability to lead in probably a much more compassionate and empathetic way.
And well, that's actually the word. What it taught me was empathy, and cultural awareness, and being able to read people. And I've always been a believer that I always said at that time, and to be honest with you, if you'd asked me as a 22-year-old going to sea, I just wanted to travel for 2 years, save some money, and then go back on land and hopefully, grow in my career. I didn't realize I would fall in love with the industry. But, in the back of my head, I always said, well, if I ever got to a senior management role on board as a general manager or hotel director type thing, um, I wouldn't lead like that, that I would be different and things like that. And I attained it, in 2008, when I was on Oceana Cruises. I was promoted to general manager, and I, took my first leadership, or as they say, four stripe officer, leading a team where I had 400 crew and team members in my team. And that was my style. Was being able to manage with humanity, with empathy, being able to read, the body language and the emotions of the team members, and understanding when they needed a shoulder or they needed someone to talk to, and being able to be approachable as well. That was one of the other things that I learned, is to ensure I made myself approachable. There's that saying, my door is always open, but then when you go, it's not always open. And I wanted to be someone who truly said, no, when my door is open, it's open, and it doesn't matter the position. I use sports analogy of it. We don't go to a game with extra players just because. Every member of the crew on board a ship is needed. They need to be on the field playing, and it doesn't matter if you're in the galley, in the pot wash, or if you're a senior FMB or whatever it might be. Each role is vital, because if we don't have clean items and clean pots, and we're not able to provide, that impacts the guests. So that's pretty much what I really took from my early days, was that emotional human side of how do I lead my team and get them to, leadership is about following, not being pushed, but following the leader because they believe in you, they believe in your vision, and they want to make you proud.
We both know that you can have a boss, a leader that really shapes the way you lead through your career if it's the right ones. I'm sure we'd find some people out there that would say you did that for them. What is one misconception that you think people have about working on ships?
First of all, it's long hours, it's long days, but the industry has evolved, and for the better, with things like MLC, the Maritime Labor Convention, and it's a lot better. Honestly, 30 years ago when I went, there was a lot of non-compliance, or, you did work 15, 17 hours a day, and there was no recording of it. There's a lot more protection for the crew, for the staff members, and that's fantastic. But also understanding the benefits for, and when I say lifestyle, because in today's generation, even more so post pandemic, people are saying, okay, yeah, the salary's good and all that kind of stuff, but I'm sacrificing time away from my family, from my friends. What do I do? What's the food like? What's the social atmosphere like? What's the wellness atmosphere like for, yeah, I'm talking about the crew. What are the activities? What are the communication opportunities? Is there free Wi-Fi? Do I get free chatting or WhatsApp or messenger things? These are very important things. And we've seen that grow. I remember my first contact going ashore on the pier and waiting in line with a phone card to use a payphone. And you had your colleagues who are from the Philippines or Mexico that, were doing 9, 10 months away and haven't seen their children. I was doing 6 months, 7 months. Being able to do that, looking forward to the mailbag arriving in port. Now, I can't remember the last time I saw a mailbag come on a ship, but we get into major ports like Fort Lauderdale or Vancouver, and there'd be two huge mailbags and just sorting. And it was such an exciting day. So things have really improved for the benefits of the crew. And the other thing, there's a lot more emotional awareness by the crew as well. We live in a very advanced stage, and even though a lot of our crew members may come from what are referred to as developing countries, they're very intellectual when it comes to social media and to communication. The media that's out there through a lot of the streaming and the YouTubes and the TikToks, they're exposed to international content. So there's some cultural awareness from their side when they're dealing with it. But the thing is that working together and every day, and I worked for 7 cruise lines in my sailing career. If there was not one that I worked on where when things went wrong, people said, "No, I'm not doing this." Everyone stood up and everyone got through, and it was that can-do attitude, which I must say in my land times during my career, I didn't see that. There was a lot more resistance or a lot more pushback. There's really people wake up on a ship and going, "I wanna do the best that I can, and I want to ensure that our guests are happy." And yes, every once in a while there's a bad apple or someone that doesn't need it, but I can say pretty much a very high percentage that's their goal. Everybody, and they want to get home and see their families and make their families proud that they've done a great job.
You know, that's so interesting to me because as you were talking, I was really thinking about the influence of all those cultures, right, on a ship and really how hospitable a lot of these, you know, third world countries, as we put them, in the Western world really are. And I think about if you took a team, like your management team on a cruise, what kind of lessons could you learn from a hospitality standpoint from a land-based hospitality organization to on ship? Do you think that they are transferable, or do you think that there are some things that can't be transferred from land to sea and vice versa?
So when I first went to sea, I would say no, it's not as transferable. But then we see in most of our countries, we have a lot of whether they're sponsored visa workers or they've migrated from a lot of these countries, so the Philippines, India, Indonesia, Bali, and places like that. So it is probably a bit more now. It's the resourcefulness and I think the
Mhm.
flexibility that really you don't have a choice. And I remember years ago trying to establish myself here in Australia. I've been in Australia 30 years now, and trying to get a job in land. And I was went in to have an interview at a hotel, and the general manager and the HR manager were asking me, they were pretty much degrading, cruise ship experience. And then at that point I realized, well, this is not a culture I want to work in. And so I turned around, I said, have you ever ran out of flour and there was no flour to be found because you have 5 days at sea? Have you ever had, unfortunately, a guest pass away and you're going into a country or a socialist country that has very strict requirements, or where crew miss their flight and you can't call part-time crew to come in, and they all kind of looked at me, and it's those experiences which happen day in and day out. I mean,
Mm.
in the United States right now with the winter storms that are happening, obviously, political tensions in other part of the world where things affect flights or itineraries and stuff like that, or a supply chain, especially post pandemic, the ships deal with it. They have no other choice because they do not want to let their guests down. And so there's probably a bit more transferable skills, but it's that living on board 24/7. And I would explain to my colleagues in land-based hospitality, I said, at the end of your day, your staff go home, so what they do at home, if they're dirty, if they're messy, if they have a fight with their partner, if they drink a little bit too much, you don't have to deal with that. As long as they show up for work at 7, 8, 9 in the morning next day, guess what? I have to deal with it. And there were days where I would spend more of my time as a general manager or hotel director dealing with HR issues, because there was behavioral issues, there was people who didn't get along, there was team members who may have received bad news from home and were taking it very well. So all those things, and so it is really a 24 hours a day, 7 day a week role when you're on board, and it's one of the reasons that cruise lines allocate, 3, 4 months on board, 2 months, because they expect you, the leadership from the cruise line executives, that as a senior manager or officer on board the ship, that you're there to represent and ensure that you can take care of these things and your focus is the crew. And I remember both guests and crew coming to me and saying, "Oh, we don't want to bother you." And I'm here to be bothered. That's why I'm here. That's why I have a cabin on board. That's why my meals are made. That's why I'm here to be bothered by you when I go on vacation. And if it's work stuff, don't bother me because I'm on vacation. Bother the gentleman or the lady who's in my seat. But that's what you're there for. You're there for 24/7 to be able to ensure that your guests and your crew are happy and that the operation runs and we're able to deliver on the brand promise to our customers as well as an employee of choice to our crew members.
It really teaches it's a lesson in grit, I can remember first getting on and it took me a long time to acclimate, and there I'll be honest, there were probably a lot of times where I was, let's use the word disgruntled maybe. I just felt it unfair. I didn't want to work all those hours. I missed my dogs. The conveniences really, and the privilege of working on land to some degree, but it's also a privilege to work at sea. But now looking back, it was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me because it taught me so many lessons in life and in my professional life.
Said, and I remember particularly one bartender that worked with me, and I had said to him, and his name was Putu, but his nickname was Spike. And I said, Spike, I said, what's your opportunities like in Bali? He says, Mr. Jason is like, Mr. Jason. He said, I had a great job. I worked at the Hard Rock Hotel in Kuta, very good hotel. I made $500 US a month. He says, here I make 2.5 thousand. And when and you hear a lot of the controversy about taking advantage. So, you know, that work has provided opportunities for their families, and it's a choice. Everyone has a choice to join the ship. Everyone goes through the process of trying to get that job, and there's many steps to get there. It's not for everybody, and I've always said to people, I will respect your decision. If you decided this is not right for you, I respect that because you're
Yes.
being honest to yourself and you're being honest to us as an employer that this may not be, and it's not for everybody. But those that do stay, and I said, even on the bad days, and I had it, I missed a lot of my daughter growing up. I missed her birth by 36 hours. And there were a couple of times she reminded me of that as she got older. And, a good example is this year, she now performs as a guest entertainer on cruise ships. So she's flying out on Sunday. I'm flying out on Friday. And this year she went away on a trip from Singapore to Bali as a guest entertainer and brought her fiance. And she was away for Christmas. And I was about to say to her, but you're gonna be away for Christmas. And I caught myself because I knew exactly I can't be a hypocrite. And,
Yeah.
and she's 26 and, and she's engaged and stuff. She has her own life. And I spent many Christmases away, so I couldn't be one to say that to her. As I get older, I'm better at catching things before I say it.
Yes, yes, that's something interesting age teaches you, isn't it? So, all right, let's talk about we talked a little bit about how the industry has changed, of course, for the welfare of the crew, right? And the way that leadership interacts and just the overarching kind of culture. Let's move into now sustainability, the foundation of this podcast is about. And it was really the catalyst for why I started my business because I just looked at it from afar, not necessarily the industry itself, but tourism, and thought we could be doing better. And you are involved with Four Ocean as an ambassador, and they're doing some incredible things. Talk to us about what that partnership looks like. What are some of the mechanisms that are being used, and how are you bringing the guest on that journey with you?
So sustainability is such a, well, they use the term buzzword, but it's a big word right now. But I always don't think people fully understand what sustainable means. And there's that environmental aspect, 100%. But sustainable means is, can you withstand something? Can something go the distance? And there's many things that need to be sustainable. And in our industry, there are a lot of the low hanging fruits. Obviously, the single service plastic and straws and stuff like that. But there's so many other ways of sustainable. Your hiring practices, the way that the crew members get to the ship. Do we send luggage tags out to guests? There's so many different aspects that the cruise line are working on. And then of course there's the fuel and the food waste management and stuff like that. So many different things. So with Four Ocean, the cruise industry, their shop front is on the sea. They live off the water, and it's important that we protect that area. We are guardians of our workplace, which is the ocean and the rivers and the waterways of the world. And it's so important that we do our best. Years ago, there were some bad practices. Those things, thankfully, have changed and improved in the cruise industry and extremely changed. I mean, I've seen the changes, and it's incredible. The cruise industry, I think, is probably one of the fastest adapting industry to sustainability practices. But there's a lot of places in the world, and again, Four Ocean was two American guys who were surfers went to Bali, and some of the local Bali surfing friends they had took them to the other side of the island that the tourists don't see, and they were shocked. Indonesia is at kind of that center point where a lot of the global trash that ends up in the ocean because of currents ends up there. It's shocking. And they said, well, we need to do something about this, and we need to start cleaning this up. And look, you can rely on volunteers to do that, but as you know, volunteers is so much personal time. It's not like a paid job where you say, okay, I'm going to show up Monday to Friday. You know what? I've got something else on. Maybe my volunteering doesn't take priority. So For Ocean took it as a way and said, okay, what do we do? Let's look at the areas. And a lot of their work is done in Indonesia, is done in Southeast Asia. They do a lot of river cleanups. They've got one coming up this weekend in South Florida, I think near West Palm or in Delray. But what they did is they've hired, and my numbers may not be exact, but it's approximately 90 locals, Indonesians who work full time. They're paid a fair wage. They're provided with quality equipment. So, proper speed boats and nets. They call it pulling a pound. So for every dollar that's contributed, they pull a pound out of the waterways. And it's incredible. And then they use some of that, and that's made into fabrics, into some great wristbands and jewelry, t-shirts and things like that. And the interesting thing is when I was approached by Full Ocean, they were also approached by another brand that I'm an ambassador for, Seatrade Cruise. And for this year, Seatrade Cruise has appointed Full Ocean as a sustainability partner. And so they will be contributing funds for every registration to support Full Ocean, because they understand that we have to be good guardians of our area. My role with Full Ocean is I'm brand ambassador of the cruise industry. Due to my profile in the cruise industry and my years in the industry, I introduced them, and the response we've had thus far has been very positive. And it's also important, today's demographic, today's cruise guests want to know that the money they're investing into that company have the same morals or the same ethics that they have. And this is so important that the consumer can vote where they put their money, and they want to invest where people or companies are doing the right thing according to their beliefs and their values.
Love that, and it makes me so happy because although it seems like something so obvious and foundational, it takes organization like this, literal a organization, but then bringing on an ambassador, influencing the cruise line and making them understand how important that is to the guests. But I'd even say I've always been such a big believer going back to that culture on ships. Indonesia is a large part of that workforce. And when they can make that connection that now you're cleaning up their home, now they have so much more pride in the job that they're doing for that company. So I just think that's amazing.
No, and that's such a valid connection. And of course, particularly the Balinese, you were talking about the natural hospitality in certain cultures, and, Southeast Asia with the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, it's just second nature to them. It's just incredible. And I'm fortunate living in this part of the world in APAC that I get to travel into that. But having worked with so many of, those colleagues, but for them, it's an honor to do it. And when they see that we take an active interest in ensuring their backyard is clean, you're an important part of the world. You're an important part to us, and we want to make sure that you have a clean environment for your children and for your next generation.
Absolutely. And that's interesting. Scott Eddy talks a lot about, that hospitality difference in Southeast Asia. And I love that you said that it's an honor because I hate to say it, but I can speak for the US. I can't speak for anybody else, but it is a means to an end, right? We're trying to get to someplace else. And, I think we could learn a lot from those other cultures and how it is a privilege to serve others and be hospitable because that's what we want to do in our homes.
Yeah, and Australia is the same. And when I came here, I was going, "Oh, interesting." It's funny. I was actually just before this call chatting with Scott, and he's having a great time. He's in Bangkok. He's just been in Bali. We're very good friends. And we're on the same time zone, so it makes it so much easier at the moment. He exactly. He lived in Southeast Asia for many years in his previous career, and to be back and see that and feel it. Look how fortunate we are that we're global citizens, that we can compare.
Yes,
Generations ago, our parents, even our grandparents, they didn't know what service was because they didn't go halfway around the world, or they didn't get to meet someone from halfway around the world. So that we can discuss it and with real life experiences is great, and see the difference in cultures. I read a great book when I started with Explorer Jenny's. Our CDO sent us a book, and it's the Culture Map by Erin Meyer. It talks about doing business with the different cultures. And it was interesting, having worked on ships, a lot of that stuff I knew, but I didn't know I knew it because, it just,
yeah,
you learned it as you went along, right? And she prepares people to do expat, assignments overseas, and how do you deal with the Chinese? How do you deal with the my last role, I was in Geneva working for the MSC group, a very Italian based company. And, in Italian culture, you don't talk until you've had a coffee. Do not talk until you have a coffee. And so it's really interesting to see that. And if you get a chance to read, it's a great read. But anyone that's in the international travel, hospitality, or just international business, it's such a valid read to understand and not just assume that if I, as a Canadian or Australian, or you as American, go overseas and go, well, you should know how I want things. No, 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 no. You're doing business with me. The way she explains it in her book is incredible.
That because I think that's so valuable. We live in such a global world now that if just because you are here, you're going to have interaction with people from all over, all walks of life. So, and I am very interested in reading that. I'll add it to my 1,000 books that I'm looking to read this year. We'll see how far I get. Okay, so before we move on, because I really want to touch on wellness at sea, and of course, those massive undertakings you took with Explorer Journeys and the World Cruise, but how is For Ocean and bringing that guest part of this solution and partnership on board?
My belief is that when a guest pays to come on a cruise or book on a cruise and they know that that cruise line is supporting that money, part of their what they're paying is helping support and it's going to some good cause. A portion of what I'm investing in my cruise with my cruise line of choice is being shared. There's a a fair wage to the staff that are on board serving us and working. At the same time, the company's doing its bit for the environment and helping contribute some of that money that comes in to environmental practices.
So it's less of here's a cup while you're on board and then reuse that cup. It's more of there's a partnership with the cruise line actually happening at a larger
That's
scale.
right.
Okay,
That's
okay.
exactly right. So in the pull a pound program, there is obviously, as I mentioned, some of that recycled material is then used to make, bracelets and mugs and caps and t-shirts. And so that is can be sold in the boutiques on board the ships as well. You see a lot of companies, especially those that sail in sensitive areas, working closely with a lot of environmental agencies to ensure that they're being good citizens to the waters that they're working in, but also helping fund whether it's restoration or cleanliness like For Ocean does, or it's wildlife awareness and safety and things like that. Especially you think of the St. Lawrence, the speed restrictions because of the whales, places down in Antarctica and Alaska. So a lot of that understanding and working with the navigational teams to better plan their navigation to avoid pods of whales or seals or wildlife in their natural
Love
environment
that.
and ensure that noise reduction. The amount of work that's been done on noise reduction on ships' engines and technical spaces that was reverberating into the water that was impacting some of the marine life, and so that has improved as well.
So great to hear. That makes me so happy because without a healthy ocean, the industry to thrive, and you don't want
That's
guests
right.
to go on and have a bad experience or see something because, that would probably deter them from taking another cruise. Okay, so let's talk about wellness at sea. I know that this is a new emerging concept and you're going to talk about it at Seatrade. Isn't that right?
For the first time, we actually have a floor space on the expo floor
Oh,
dedicated Wellness Oasis, and so this is done in partnership with Spark Cooperative, creative studio in Miami, who I actually worked with during the development of Explorer Journeys on our entertainment and our ocean wellness program. And so this will be a space that will have obviously panels and insights to wellness. Um, There'll be exhibits of suppliers of whether wellness products, wellness services, wellness concepts, and there'll be little spaces where attendees, people can come, escape, do some mindfulness and get away. I think
mm.
we're planning to have a healthy happy hour, to come and have some juices or fresh juices and things like that. So it's fantastic. And in my role as I'm a guest experience and wellness ambassador for Seatrade Cruise, and so this was such an addition or evolution of Seatrade Cruise because it's such an important part of leisure time. And guests and travelers want to ensure that they're able to maintain their regime even on vacation. If you think of the old cruise joke, I'm taking my pants with me because they're going to stretch, or the laundry shrunk my clothes. People are actually talking about I can go on a cruise and lose weight. And it's not because they're starving themselves, it's because it's balance, and
Yeah.
we've been
Yeah.
educated so much to know about balance. Eating right, culinary development, that is, calorie counting, carbs, different, that you can choose and not lose out on quality and still eat a healthy menu. Working out, whether it's in the fitness center, if it's in your suite, there's a lot of equipment being put in suites. Explore journeys that can be developed in outdoor fitness area. Enrichment, so having enrichment presenters who are talking about sleep, talking about mindfulness, talking about physical nutrition, all those elements, and then extending that to the shore experiences and the destinations that you go to. Maybe it's yoga in the forest, maybe it's a light hike or kayaking. And so these things are so important in today's traveler. And we have to remember that cruising has been such a growth industry since the 70s. But a lot of the original cruisers are now starting to, unfortunately, not be able to cruise. And that next generation that's coming in, and there's that huge transition of generational wealth that's taking place around the world for, our post-war parents built up, not liquid assets, and now that, when they're passing on, they're leaving these, uh, you know, uh, and estates to the next generation. So there's a large growth in that. And a lot of those, 45 to 55, 60-year olds, have been maintaining their health, and they have the money to travel. They're very inquisitive. They want to be immersed, and they want to make sure that they're doing the right thing for themselves as well, even when they're on vacation on a cruise.
And that is just such an indicator of, first of all, it's very innovative, but it is an indicator of the evolution of the traveler.
That was your conscious check-in. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and let us know who you'd love to hear from next. Until next time, travel deeper and stay inspired.